The New Orleans Saints need to be ready if disaster strikes in the NFL draft. What happens if all the top tackles and edge rushers are off the board? We got all of that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I'm your host, Ross Jackson, your New Orleans native, New Orleans Saints expert, and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a senior writer and reporter over at Saints News Network. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, we're going to be going through our mock draft here on Mock Draft Monday. All 7 rounds, round 1 through round 7. We got them all, including, of course, 4 fifth-round selections. We're going to take a look at how the Saints can use this draft to get ready for that zone run game that should be incoming with Klint Kubiak on the way. Why the New Orleans Saints need to add not just an edge rusher, but a dynamic edge rusher in this year's draft. And we're going to kick it all off with a look at the first and second rounds. What happens if all the top tackles as well as top edge rushers are off the board in the first round? We got that coming up for you here on today's episode. We appreciate you very much. As always, we get Locked On Saints, your first listen of the day every day, for being an everydayer here on the show and here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the most exciting and easiest way to play daily fantasy sports. Just head over to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and enter the promo code LockedOnNFL in all lowercase for a first deposit match up to $100. So what happens if the New Orleans Saints are on the board at 14 and guys like Klint Kubiak are off the board, guys like Jared Verse, Laiatu Latu, all off the board? What do you do if you're the New Orleans Saints? Well, I went in with a goal in mind, didn't get to execute it, so I even had to go to another backup plan to land the New Orleans Saints a top flight wide receiver in this year's NFL draft. Yeah, I broke a lot of rules in this one. So let's go ahead and start to break it down. I want to tell you real quick before we dive in that tomorrow's episode will be all about Klint Kubiak and the hire hopefully becoming official. There's a lot of news that broke on Sunday ahead of the Super Bowl game, which I'm recording this before the Super Bowl, around, the idea that basically like NFL Network and all of them kind of catching up to what we've been telling you for weeks, which is that the Saints are going to hire Klint Kubiak and it will be made official after the Super Bowl. So we'll get to all of that in tomorrow's episode on Tuesday, or if there's something pressing enough around it, I'll do another episode today to get you all caught up. But I'm focusing on a mock draft for this one. That way I can get stuff recorded for you and ready to go. So let's start off with where I went here to begin this mock draft. So no Klint Kubiak, no Laiatu Latu, no Jared Verse, no Tyler Guyton, none of the top tackles or edge rushers, no Joe Alt, all those guys, all of them off the board. What do I do at pick 14? Well, my hope was actually to go with Illinois defensive tackle Jazon Newton, because he is a game wrecker on the interior. And at 14, you're at a pretty good spot to be able to land a guy like that, but he's probably going to end up going top 10, or at least he did in this scenario. So I went with, and I mentioned that I broke a lot of rules here, but I went with LSU wide receiver Brian Thomas Jr. Now, listen, I know he's an LSU Tiger, and the New Orleans Saints drafting LSU Tigers, there is nothing more deadly for a mock draft in this market than this, but I don't care. Look, when you came down to what the selections were, there were not a lot of good options. So when I go to a guy that's got 68 receptions, 1,177 receiving yards, and 17 receiving touchdowns in 2023, I think I'm going to roll the dice on that one. Now, my good friend Dylan Sanders, who was visiting this weekend, did mention that it is kind of funny to go from Thomas and Olave to Thomas Jr. and Olave, and I will give him credit for that joke, and I will also say it because I do think it's very funny. But look, the Saints need one of those bigger-bodied receivers, and if you look at a guy like Brian Thomas Jr., he comes out with the height situation. Probably want to add a little bit of pounds in terms of weight to him, just to kind of get him a little bit over that hump and things like that, where he can be more physical and everything. But just the amount of talent that he has is undeniable. I mean, he's a guy that can go up there and win some 50-50 balls for you, but he's also got really good speed as well. So he does a lot of things. And look, I'm not the only one making this connection here. And I'm not even making it on the Louisiana side of it all. It's a fit. Cynthia Freeland, who we've had here on the show before, over at NFL Network, did her first mock draft and her first round mock draft, and hers she had the New Orleans Saints taking Brian Thomas as well and measured out effectively why that would make sense. And again, it's that combination of Thomas and Olave part 2, I guess you can say, that just makes a ton of sense. Like these two guys would build off of one another. Rashid Shaheed would complement the both of them. A.T. Perry continues to, would continue to get his opportunities as well. I just think there's really, really good stuff here by gathering a guy like Brian Thomas when the other options are off the board. Now, you could also just look to trade back here too. Don't get me wrong. You could trade back and then maybe fall back a bit to grab a different tackle or a different edge rusher or something like that. But the good news is that even with making a selection like this and having to go wide receiver in the first round, it didn't take long before I was able to still address the trenches, which we know is going to be the priority for the New Orleans Saints. So let's get to round 2 here. So after Brian Thomas, the wide receiver at LSU, I'm going with Graham Barton, the offensive tackle out of Duke. Allowed 2 sacks last year. 50.4% of his rushing snaps, run blocking snaps, are all in zone run situations. 2 seasons in a row to where he's had a pretty good sort of 50-50 split when it came to not only man run, but also zone run. And then 2,569 career snaps along the way. A lot of good experience for him as well. So Graham Barton, definitely another one of those kind of second round offensive tackles that you can draft and effectively find a means to utilize right away. And he's somebody that fits. He's taken a lot of snaps at left tackle, 492 last year, 895 the year before that, 747 the year before that. So he's got a lot of experience there. And his measurables come in looking pretty good. 6'5", 314 pounds. That's right in the pocket of what the New Orleans Saints like from a prototypical size standpoint. So you can't get a first round tackle in this year's draft. No big deal. You'll be able to find one effectively in the second round. I mean, there are guys that are talking about this offensive tackle class as if the 5th offensive tackle this year would be the first offensive tackle in many other NFL drafts. And I think that that's accurate. I think that that's true based upon what I saw from this tackle class a little bit in Mobile, what we can see by watching the tape on all of these guys as well. I mean, it's been very, very impressive. So because of that, I don't think you have to be bummed if you're the New Orleans Saints. I don't think you have to be panicked if you're the New Orleans Saints and you don't get a tackle in the first round. Heck, if you don't get a tackle in the top 100, you're still not out of the conversation to eventually land a solid one like a Javon Foster out of Missouri, for instance. So there's really, really good options out there for the New Orleans Saints when it comes to building up that offensive line. They don't have to rush to it in the first round. And so in a situation like this, in this scenario that I was playing up where all the top tackles are off the board, all the top edge rushers are off the board, you got to go with somebody that's still going to be able to bring you some value, but is effectively the best player available on the list. And we went with Brian Thomas Jr., the wide receiver at LSU. It did not put the New Orleans Saints out of contention for a tackle that some other year would be tackle number 1 in Graham Barton out of Duke, who, by the way, again, that team running a lot of that zone run offense over there as well. So a good fit for what's incoming for the New Orleans Saints. Now, coming up next, we didn't get that edge rusher in the first or second round, so it means we have to wait all the way to the 5th round. So let's grab one that's incredibly dynamic because that's what the New Orleans Saints absolutely need. Prototype be damned. We got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends at Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports, and it's super simple. You're not playing against a bunch of mystery lineups and things you just kind of have to take for granted might have beat you. This is you and your knowledge of your favorite sport, players, teams, whatever, up against the house. It's you versus the projections. Prize Picks will assign projections to different players. All you have to do is take 2 to 6 of those players and choose more or less than their Prize Pick stat projections, and you win. It's that simple. You think that this, LeBron James is going to score more than 25.5 points? More. Think it's going to be less? Less. If he doesn't, if he does that, boom, you win. It's that simple. It's awesome. I love playing Prize Picks. It takes all the guesswork out of stuff, makes it a lot more fun, and allows you to really be able to win with your skill. So go and check them out today. PrizePicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use promo code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. It's first deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Promo code LockedOnNFL. Prize Picks, daily fantasy sports made easy. All right, family. The New Orleans Saints must, one way or another, find a dynamic edge rusher this off season. And the NFL draft provides a lot of opportunity, even late round wise, to do exactly that. That's what we're breaking down as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Appreciate you as always, making this your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget to go and check out the Locked On Sports Today YouTube stream. It's the first ever 24/7 national sports YouTube stream. You can find it over at Locked On Sports Today on YouTube. Go and subscribe, check it out, and be a part of history. So I think that the New Orleans Saints absolutely must find a way to grab a dynamic edge rusher, pass rusher in this year's draft. And when I talk about dynamic, I mean explosive, I mean fast, I mean athletic, not necessarily big, not necessarily powerful, but explosive, fast, speedy, bendy, all of those things. So that brings us to our first of 4 fifth-round selections for the New Orleans Saints, coming off of wide receiver Brian Thomas, coming off of offensive tackle Graham Barton. Let's take a look at edge rusher out of Colorado State University, Alvin Kamara. Now, as fun as it would be to have 2 Kamaras on the team, that's not really the relevant conversation here. The relevant conversation is 29.5 career sacks, 45.5 career tackles for a loss, and a 19.4% 2023 pass rush win rate, which is a very, very good number here in this year's draft class. Now, look, Kamara is not somebody that fits the New Orleans Saints mold when it comes to edge rusher at all. And what we know about the New Orleans Saints is that over the course of the past 2 seasons, they have benefited greatly from the play of guys that are rushing the passer that don't fit their prototype. They've benefited greatly from guys rushing that hit their prototype, like Carl Granderson, like Cam Jordan, particularly Cam Jordan back in 2022 when he wasn't dealing with as many injuries. But it's been Zach Bond. It's been Caden Ellis, who have had big-time impact in the latter stretch of seasons for the New Orleans Saints rushing off the edge. Alvin Kamara, 6'1", 250 pounds. Small, too small for the prototype. But right now, I say the prototype doesn't matter. You can build the prototype in free agency. You can build off the prototype if you draft a first-round edge rusher. When you get to the 5th round and you got a guy like Alvin Kamara still on the board that can come out, and I know he played in a lesser conference of the Power Fives out in the Pac-12 with Colorado State and all that kind of stuff, but it doesn't matter. He is disruptive. He is fast. He's not the best when it comes to the run game, but you have those guys. He's a fantastic 3rd down situational, go out there, pin your ears back, and get to the quarterback type of rusher. A lot of Saints fans probably saw here recently that the Philadelphia Eagles granted Hassan Reddick the opportunity to go out and pursue a trade to see if he would be able to find a new landing spot and things like that. I got tagged in a bunch of that. Would I love if the New Orleans Saints went out and got Hassan Reddick? 100%. I would love that. Do I think that that's going to happen? No. But if we're thinking about guys that are going to be a good comparison for Alvin Kamara in the pros at 6'1", 250 pounds, Hassan Reddick, 6'1", 240 pounds. And remember, when he was with the Arizona Cardinals, they tried him off ball first, didn't work. And then they moved him to on ball, or they moved him into being a pass rusher. And boom, when he got to Philly, he took off. And so I'm looking at a guy like Alvin Kamara as somebody that could potentially fill that same role. Okay, so that's my big dynamic pass rusher for the New Orleans Saints, even as late as the 5th round. We'll see how he continues to climb as the process goes on and stuff like that. But right now, that's about where he's mocked. Okay, let's move on. We'll finish up the 5th round before we wrap up the rest of the draft here in a little bit. Or actually, no, we're going to go through two more here in the 5th round. So with the next selection in the 5th round, this is when we start to get into the compensatory selections that don't have a solid landing spot, 170-ish, somewhere around there. Penn State tight end Theo Johnson. If you've been around the Locked On Saints podcast for more than like 6 minutes, you know that Theo Johnson is a big-time draft crush of mine. In 2023, he had 77 receptions, 938 yards, 12 receiving touchdowns. He's also 6'6", 257 pounds, moves incredibly well. Just kind of gives you, we're talking about a dynamic pass rusher. He gives you another dynamic pass catcher over on the other side. So you get a Brian Thomas early on in this draft. Then you follow that up with a Theo Johnson later on in the draft. Like, those are 2 really good pass catchers, dynamic playmakers on the offensive side at the skill position, group that can come in and have a major impact on your offense. And I think, look, the Saints are going to want to roll out a lot of 2 tight end sets. If Klint Kubiak is going to bring a little bit of the Gary Kubiak influence, but some of that Sean McVay offense to New Orleans, they're going to want to be able to utilize and have 2 tight ends out on the field. And so being able to rotate between guys like Juwan Johnson, Foster Moreau, Theo Johnson, and Taysom Hill, that gives you every bit of the dynamics that you're looking for from the position and amongst your pass catching core. So it's a really, really good fit to add a guy like Theo Johnson and come in and who can also be a red zone threat for you the way that Jimmy Graham was last year at 6'6", 257 pounds. Yeah, he put the Theois Maximus out there. Like we were talking about the Jimmy's, what did we call it? Maximus Jimmius. Put all that on receivers. You could see that same thing with a guy like Theo Johnson going out there and making big plays. So I really love the idea of adding not only a big-bodied pass-catching wide receiver, but a big-bodied pass-catching tight end that can come in, move well, be able to attack the middle of the field, and be a potential red zone threat for you. Even early on, while he doesn't have like a carved-out role right away, he can go out there and help you out in the red zone. And if there's anything that you know about the San Francisco 49ers offense, number 1 in the NFL when it comes to red zone conversion percentage, effectively 68.5%. That's well above where the Saints ranked at just over 53%. 18th in the NFL. A guy like Theo Johnson would have a big time red zone role for sure. All right, to wrap us up for this segment, let's take a look at our second 5th round compensatory selection here. And I'm going back to the defensive interior. I didn't get Jazon Newton early on in the draft, which remember was my original plan. So I came back around to a guy that we're familiar with, Auburn defensive tackle Marcus Harris. Marcus Harris is just one of these big bowling ball type of defensive tackles, 31 career tackles for a loss, 11 career sacks, which is pretty solid on just a couple of years in Auburn rushing from the interior, and a 10.2 run stop win rate, which is really, really important, or a run stop rate rather, which is really important. That's a really good number for an interior defensive lineman and somebody that can really have an impact for you in the middle of the defense. You remember at one point when the Saints defense was really at its best, it was still featuring guys like Shy Tuttle and, even the guys that you already know and love, like Cam Jordan, and I almost said Marcus Davenport, but I know you don't love Marcus Davenport, but you know Marcus Davenport. But remember when the Saints defense line was like really at its best, they had Malcolm Brown. Malcolm Brown, the big 320 plus run stop plugger in the middle of the defense and all that kind of stuff. Marcus Harris kind of fits that same mold. He's not the same size as a Malcolm Brown, but he's somebody that would complement the athleticism of a Brian Brzee, of a Nathan Shepard, to kind of fill the like Malcolm Roach situation, which you saw last year where Malcolm Roach was outstanding against the run, but then dealt with injury. He complements a Colin Saunders incredibly well. So I think that he'd be one of those guys that's going to add that run stopping capability, but a little bit of dynamic in terms of athleticism and still being able to be disruptive in the middle of the field as well. All right, coming up next, the New Orleans Saints need to be able to be ready and retool for the incoming zone run heavy approach that we expect will be on its way here to New Orleans with Klint Kubiak. How can they do that in the NFL draft? We're going to break that down as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends at DoorDash. Look, I know when it comes to the Super Bowl and when it's all said and done, all anybody wants to talk about is the game. But how about that DoorDash ad, though? The commercial. Oh my gosh, where they completely decided to just go all out on game day and they DoorDash some stuff from all of the ads to one lucky winner, including like cars, snacks, tax software even. And somehow they just pulled it all off. I don't know. But anyway, I'm a little bit bummed that I didn't win, but I got to hand it to them. That was one heck of a delivery. So if you haven't tried DoorDash before, if you saw that, you know the quality that you're getting when it comes to the best food delivery app, groceries and everything like that as well. So look, football season may be over, but we're still in the thick of basketball season, the school year, all of that. So let's face it, winter as well, right? No matter what, you can think of a million reasons to stay in and use DoorDash. Hop on the app and make your day a little bit easier. So do so with DoorDash today. Your door to more. Head to the DoorDash app and get everything that you need delivered right to your door. Let's get it. Who Dat Nation? The New Orleans Saints should use as many draft picks as possible to ready themselves for the incoming zone run heavy scheme that should be on its way with Klint Kubiak at offensive coordinator in 2024. That's what we're going to dedicate the rest of this draft to, particularly over on the offensive side. But don't worry, we're not done with the defense just yet either. Appreciate you very much for making us your first listen or view every single day here on the show. Don't forget, we are your team every day. So tomorrow, we're going to be taking a look at the official Klint Kubiak hiring and what it means for the New Orleans Saints. What's next? We'll start to build out sort of the offseason plan for New Orleans as well. And take a look at what are some of the things you saw in the Super Bowl game by the San Francisco 49ers that would be applicable to the New Orleans Saints. We're going to go through all that in tomorrow's episode. For now, let's wrap up our mock draft. So we're going to jump to our last compensatory selection in the 5th round, and we're going back to the offensive line. Trevor Keegan, the offensive tackle out of Michigan, or really offensive lineman out of Michigan, played a lot more on the interior than the outside. 0 sacks allowed in 2023, 11 career sacks allowed, not bad at all. 2,253 total career snaps taken. So again, a lot of experience, just like Graham Barton, who we mocked to the Saints earlier. So a guy like Trevor Keegan coming in on what would actually be the interior of the New Orleans Saints offensive line could be very helpful. Now remember, we don't know what's going to happen on the interior of the offensive line. For the New Orleans Saints, will Andrews Pete be back? Will James Hurst play on the inside? Will he have to bounce out to the outside? Depending upon how things go with Trevor Penning, all that kind of stuff. More competition on the way in the draft and free agency and all this other stuff. So a guy like Trevor Keegan's just one of those dudes that you like draft late to make sure that you're ready to go, and he's a guy that's done a lot when it comes to the zone run game as well as the gap run game, does well in both of those. But in particular, he's a very, very good pass blocker. As you mentioned, 0 sacks allowed in 2023. He scored pretty highly when it came to pass block grade from Pro Football Focus as well, if that means anything to you. 80.7, so 80.7 there. 6'6", 320 pounds, so really good size, particularly on the interior as well. Could be a really, really good player to just come in and just kind of like Nick Saldiveri, right? You get another one of those guys that you get an opportunity to get a look at when the time is appropriate and when the time is there, and boom, you're off and running to the races if he pans out. And if not, it's a 5th round pick, not a big deal, totally fine. So I like the selection. I do think that the Saints should invest in their interior offensive line and continue to build that up, whether it's free agency or the draft. This was an example of how they could do it in the draft. We're actually going to stick with Michigan for our first of 2 6th round selections. We're going back to the defensive line, Jalen. This is a situation where I think the New Orleans Saints as the New Orleans Saints had a really good opportunity to double dip at edge rusher again. 6.5 sacks last year, 9 tackles for a loss in 2023. Also adds a 19.7% pass rush win rate for 2023, just barely actually above Alvin Kamara, who we drafted earlier, who was at 19.4. So just a good example of how you can potentially land 2 dynamic edge rushers to help you out. Jalen Harrell, a little bit more in line with the Saints prototype. He was at the Senior Bowl as well, so you know that always fits. 6'3", 251 pounds. So just gets that little bit of height that's available to him there, and then is also able to probably add on to that 250 pounds, much like Kamara could too. But at 6'1", you don't want to add too much on Kamara. You can add more on Harrell at 6'3", believe it or not. So I think that that's a really good situation for the Saints to be able to get a pair of these guys that can be dynamic, that can bend, that can be disruptive off the edge, but then get you a guy that can also help you out in terms of power as well, and get you some tackles for a loss, get into the backfield and get disruptive. So I think like the addition of Alvin Kamara, the addition of Marcus Harris, and then now the addition of Jalen Harrell, like really, really good way to address your defensive line for now, but also for a couple of years from now as well. So you can continue to grow some of that young talent. Now, let's get back to our goal of giving the New Orleans Saints what they need to be ready for the zone run concepts. And now I'm going to throw a name at you that I know we have not talked about here on the show. You might not have even heard before. Isaiah Davis, the running back out of South Dakota State University. Yes, South Dakota State University. Ross, why South Dakota State University? Well, that's easy. Isaiah Davis coming in at 6 foot, 220 pounds. Ran for over 1,500 yards last year, just alone in 2023. 18 rushing touchdowns, averaged 6.7 yards per attempt, yards per carry as well. This dude is explosive. So just like a Kamani Vidal, just like a Cody Schrader, here's just another option for a late round running back that could potentially hit the ground running for you, Isaiah Pacheco style, right? Like just to be one of those dudes that comes in. And here's the other piece of it too. The vast majority of his carries came in zone run situations. This is what South Dakota State University does. This is what Isaiah Davis is used to doing. We don't know what's going to happen with Jamal Williams this offseason. We don't know what's going to happen to Alvin Kamara in 2 to 3 years, 1 to 3 years. We don't know, right? We don't know the longevity of all of this. And so getting another young running back alongside a Kendre Miller, like an Isaiah Davis, who is familiar with running concepts that you're going to be implementing within your system with your new offensive coordinator, that's got good speed, that is explosive, that does all these things, that caught more passes each and every year, but only 23 last year. So very much like Kendre Miller in that case, but showed that he can catch those passes, showed it a bit at the Senior Bowl as well, was at the Senior Bowl. I mean, it feels like something that couldn't make sense for the New Orleans Saints. So him, Kamadi Vidal, Cody Schrader, all really, really good options for late round running backs in this year's draft. And we haven't even gotten to all of the good late round running backs in this year's draft. But to me, the combination of him as well as Trevor Keegan gives you sort of that next generation of guys that's ready to run your system, assuming you stick with the system for the next few years. All right, to wrap us all up here, round 7, final selection of this draft, somewhere around the 233 area. This is one that the Saints got from Denver in the Sean Payton trade. I went back to the defensive side here to wrap us up. We're going to go Oregon State safety, Ketan Oladapo. Let me tell you about this dude, okay? Oladapo is awesome. 6'2", 219 pounds, coming out of Oregon State. 15 career tackles for a loss, 6.5 career sacks. Now, you might hear those numbers and think, well, that's actually kind of pedestrian for career numbers. But remember, we're not talking about a defensive end here. We're not talking about a linebacker here. We're talking about a safety, okay? 3 career interceptions, 23 passes defended as well. Put Oladapo in the box and let him cook. Or put him in the slot and let him cook. He is one of those dudes late in this draft that I think you can get your hands on and make a viable starter out of. He's got everything. NFL size. He's not super fast, but if you keep him in the box and you keep him to where he's operating closer to the line of scrimmage, you don't mind that. You might get burned every now and then on the slot situation and everything. So maybe it's better to keep him as like a dime safety or something like that. But my goodness, this dude just is a wrecking ball and just makes plays. And so I could not pass him up in the 7th round. Like, again, it's one of those situations where if it works, it works. That's like fantastic. If it doesn't work, not at all a big deal. So Ketan Oladapo out of Oregon State wraps us up. So we got a dynamic wide receiver, an explosive playmaker to start us up, but didn't lose the opportunity to still be able to add to the trenches between the offensive line and the defensive line. We did a lot of good rebuilding with this draft, and we added another dynamic playmaker on the offensive side in Theo Johnson, a running back that fits the mold, and a safety that would be like the perfect safety for this New Orleans Saints defense scheme. For Dennis Allen, for Marcus Robertson. Like, if the Saints would have traded for Isaiah Simmons and brought Isaiah Simmons to New Orleans, and then did what the Cardinals should have done a long time ago, which was put him in the DB room, that's what you would get with a Ketan Oladapo. That's why I really like this dude and his athleticism. You would just probably have a faster player in Isaiah Simmons. So really good stuff here on this mock draft. Don't forget that we'll be back with you again tomorrow, breaking down the Klint Kubiak hire and some things from the San Francisco 49ers Super Bowl performance that you might see implemented here in New Orleans, just to give you some solid examples for a game that we're all going to watch. Enjoy it, and I will see you again here very, very soon. I appreciate you very much, as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day, every day. Big time win for the LSU Lady Tigers women's basketball team over Alabama. Make sure you go and check out Locked On LSU. Caroline Fenton going to break it all down for you. Appreciate you as always, making Locked On Saints a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. Big shout out to Christina. Thank you so much for saying hi the last time that you saw me over at Endymion. Meant a lot to be able to chat with you. As always, if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation, I'll holla at you.